Good afternoon, ma'am.
ma'am.
See the whiteboard.
No, ma'am.
Yes or no?
No, ma'am.
I guess it is visible now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So yesterday what we were discussing the section which talks about secret key authentication in case of SNMP v3. So we discussed about the fact that whenever any communication happens between the principal and the SNMP engine, or you can say it as an SNMP agent, whatever communication happens, all of the communication would require the usage of a shared secret key or secret authentication key. Okay, so whenever any communication, let's say between P and SNMP engine happens, so this entire communication or this entire sharing of the messages between both of these entities would always require a shared secret key. Okay, so to achieve the authentication, each pair of principal and the remote SNMP engines who wishes to communicate must share secret authentication key. Okay, so this key can be utilized by the sender as well as it can be utilized by the receiver. Now, if we talk about the concept of sender, what happens in case of a sender? Okay, how does the sender provides the authentication, or how does it provide the authentication just for communicating or sending the message? How does it provide? What does it need to send? He would obviously be required to send some of the message. So let's say the sender is sending a message. Um, Here M denotes a message. Okay. Now you cannot send this entire message in raw format. Since you have a open communication, there are higher chances of eavesdropping into the transmission channel. What needs to be done? You would encrypt it. Okay. Now, if I'm just going to encrypt it and then send it to the receiver, what might happen? Let's say there can be chances that the intruder has access to the algorithm which is used for decrypting the message, and he modifies the message and then sends it over. Okay, so in that case, at the sender side, the message that would be received would not be the actual message which was sent by the sender. Clear? What needs to be done in such a case is there needs to be some sort of authentication mechanism which needs to be adopted by the sender, so that your message which is actually being sent by the sender doesn't get modified. So in that context, there is a concept named as MAC, which is referred as Message Authentication Code. Okay, so this message authentication code along with the message is sent by the sender. Why is this being sent? Just to provide the entire authentication factor. Clear? Now the message which is being sent here, this is in accordance to SNMP v3 version. Okay, what does this MAC has? Since I said that this is a message authentication code, so this MAC would have other factors just to make the receiver believe that whatever the message has been sent and whatever the message has been received by the receiver is the actual message. Okay, so what are you doing over here? We are trying to authenticate a particular message so that if the message is modified via communication or via transmission, the receiver gets to know that the received message is not the actual message which is being received. So in that case, what this message authentication code has, it has multiple values within it, or it is composed of multiple other fields. The first and foremost field which needs to be there in this is the actual message. So there is duplication here. This is raw message plus the MAC. Now within the MAC, what you'll have, you'll again have the raw message. Fine. Next, what you need to have is the sender who is sending the message, his identity needs to be present. So let's say we were having principal as the sender. So here P is your sender. That is why you will also have P's identity within it. Okay. Next thing, this message is being sent by P and is intended to some SNMP engine. So that SNMP engine's identity also needs to be there. Therefore, the third thing is engine's ID. Okay. Next, what other things need to be there so that you validate whether the actual message is which is being received is the one which is sent at this particular instant only. There can be cases where the previous messages are being sent. Okay, so in order to make this received message or the message which is being sent valid, there needs to be information like transmission time. Okay, understood? And the final thing which needs to be there is the last thing which is required is the secret key. Okay. Now, using all of these factors, actual message, sender's identity, receiver's identity, the time at which the transmission is happening, and possibly the secret key, all of these informations are concatenated into the message, and then a final message authentication code is generated. Clear? Now, this entire information or this entire packet which has message plus MAC is sent to the receiver. Any doubt?
No, ma'am.
Now, the first thing which comes into our mind is why are we sending the secret key? Why are we sending the secret key inside the MAC? Since already we know that the secret key is the key which is already possessed by the sender and the receiver. What is the need of sending the secret key? Or is it essential to send the secret key? Any uh, explanation for this? Nidhi? Mm-mm. No. Anybody else?
Authentication for the sender.
Authentication for the sender. How will secret key give authentication for the sender?
The shared key will be unique for the sender and SNP engine.
Hmm.
So they will use the shared key as a for communication. So the shared secret key will be unique.
So if I do not add the secret key over here, then also will it work?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am,
ma'am.
in case if any intruder tries to manipulate the message, so
Hmm.
maybe to check it at the receiver's end.
That only I'm saying na. Even if the intruder tries to manipulate the message, you cannot do inverse of MAC. Clear? MAC is always a one-way function. When received at the receiver side, you cannot calculate the inverse, which was actually possible in encryption and decryption. Encryption में क्या होता है कि you write E and then the message. At the decryption side, this is E inverse of the message. However, if we go for a MAC function, or since these are the values which are generated after a hash function is applied, and hash functions are one-way functions. So inverse of hash will not be able to calculate. That is why if I talk about this entire message which is being received by the receiver, receiver will exactly use this MAC. He will not extract individual values from this. Okay, so if I do not add the secret key as well, that the MAC which is received by the receiver will not have any influence. Okay, you can add secret key or you do not add secret key. Methodologies at both the ends will be same. Okay, so now what is happening? As soon as the sender sends in the message, upon the receiving of upon the reception of this message at the receiver side, what would receiver do is he would extract the message from this message plus MAC combination. Okay, now he would apply whatever possible thing was done in this particular MAC on this received message. Okay, so what would he do? He'll concatenate the sender's ID, he'll concatenate the engine's ID, and he'll try to find out the transmission time. Okay, and then finally calculate MAC of the received message. If the received message MAC and the calculated message MAC is same, then the receiver would understand that the message has not been modified. Had there been any eavesdropping or any modification done by the intruder into the message which is being transmitted, then the calculated MAC at the receiver side will not match with the received MAC. In that case, he would discard it. Clear? Now, what happens is when we are calculating the secret key, who calculates and when does the secret key is evaluated? How do we, at what instance is the secret key generated? So normally the secret key is generated initially and is generated outside the SNMP version 3. Okay, so what happens is the configuration manager or the network manager is responsible for distributing the initial secret keys which are loaded into the databases of SNMP managers and the agents. And once these are done, either by doing manually entering these keys into the databases or by some sort of secure data transfer, which is present in SNMP v3. Once this is done, then you can use those existing databases keys for communication. Okay. Now, the other thing which comes in context of secret key authentication is that we need to find out whether the USM authentication, which is user security modules authentication, is done correctly. That is it done in a timeliness verification manner or not? What is the significance of having a timeliness verification? I'll give you an example. Let's say there are two units which are communicating. One is C and the other one is S. Okay. Now when C and S are communicating, what do? We are sending a message M. Okay. When we are sending this message M, let's say the client would like to use some of the resources which are running onto the server. Now, in order to use those resources which are running onto the server, what needs to be done? Your client needs to send his credentials to the server, and once those credentials are validated by the server, your server will generate a response. Okay, so this would be generated. So here this is the request and the other one is response. Okay, let's say when the client is sending the request uses login ID plus password. Okay, now one way to send in this request is I'll send this entire information in the raw format. If I send this entire information in raw format or in plain text format, what would happen? Obviously, if I consider an ideal environment, this will be considered as a valid request. Upon receiving at the server side, your server would find out whether both of these credentials match. If they match, then your server would grant a response for it and it would grant the right that the client can access the server. However, instead of considering that very standard case which doesn't exist in current world, what would I do? I'll send this login ID in raw format or I'll encrypt the password. Okay, so this is the entire packet which is being sent in an encrypted format, or this in a raw format and this in an encrypted format to the server. Then the response is generated. Okay, now there's a concept which is referred as replay attack. Okay, what happens in replay attack is, for instance, the eavesdropper was present over here. Okay, so when at the first instance, when the client was sending the request and a response was generated, he did not do any operation. Fine. The client had a valid TCP connection, he had an open window with which he can communicate with the server. Okay. Now, once the request which the client was requesting to has been satisfied by the server, the client no more does any communication. In that case, what might happen is, since the communication channel is still open, your eavesdropper has done some operations which were actually not valid operations. What did he do? He tried to capture one of the packet which contains the encrypted form of login ID and password. Okay. Now when he contains this packet at some, let's say T2 instance, he had sent this entire packet to the server. Now technically what would happen, since your server has again received that encrypted message, he would reply back saying that, seeing that both of the informations are valid and I can grant the access to the client who is sending the information. Okay, so here what is done, the intruder, he has eavesdropped the communication and stolen the packet which was sent in an encrypted format. He doesn't know what is the login ID and what is the individual password. So what did he do? He captured that packet which was already encrypted and sent it to the server. So in a standard case, if this happens, your server would reply to that client which has sent the packet. Fine. Such sort of attacks are referred as replay attacks. Clear? Any doubt? Are you clear with replay attack? Okay. Can you tell me a defense for such sort of attacks? How can you prevent this? There is a concept named as challenge response. This is used to prevent the replay attacks. What happens here is, since the server found that the received packet is already an encrypted packet. Okay. So what would server do? He would see in his database that similar sort of packet had already been sent to that particular client, to that particular server at some instance T0. So in that case, when before replying the actual packet to the intruder or to that particular client, what would he do? He would ask the sender, here your sender is E. He would ask the sender to send the user ID in raw format. Okay, so this is a challenge given by the server to the system E. Okay, now obviously E would obviously be not knowing what is the actual user ID or login ID of the client जिसको वो pretend कर रहा है. In that case, when the E sends some random information to the server, your server would find out that the actual message which is received now is different from the message from which the client was sending the information. Okay, so here the received message was from E and the password, C and the password. Now, when E is sending the information to the S based upon the challenge, then he would obviously not send C. He sends, let's say, C dash. So the received message is having C dash. However, the previous message had C plus password. There's a mismatch between the login IDs. Then the server would no longer respond to the system E. Now, this is one form of a challenge response. There can be multiple ways in which your server sends in the requests or establishes a challenge response protocol. Okay, there can be, so in order to prevent such sort of replay attack and to have a better challenge response, is the method used where you're using the synchronization values or the timestamps. So the similar scenario can occur in a principal and SNMP engine as well. Okay, so this is technically referred as, in order to prevent the replay attacks, or you need to have, or in order to have a proper USM authentication, there is a need of timeliness verification. Okay, so that there is a reasonable time window which is provided to protect against the message delays and the replay attacks. Clear? Now, how is the timeliness verification provided in a USM authentication? There are two functions which are supported, which are there into the USM, or the timeliness verification is supported by two functions. The first one is synchronization and the other one is time window checking. Okay. So in order to address or in order to incorporate these two functions, one is synchronization and time window checking, the variables or the uh, message format which we discussed in last class has some of the variables which are used in order to have synchronization and time window checking. Okay, so in case of SNMP engine, we assume that there are two engines. One is the authoritative engine and the other one is a non-authoritative engine. Okay, so the authoritative engine is the one which is responsible for authentication and verifying whether the received credentials are valid or not, or whether the principal is able to access that particular engine or not. Okay, so here what happens is the authoritative engine maintains values like or maintains the parameters like SNMP engine boot, and next is SNMP engine time. So these are the two important values which are being or variables whose values are maintained by the authoritative engine. Okay. The first one, which is the SNMP engine boot, what does it keep track of? It keeps track of the number of boots which are taken place, which are happening since the initialization of the system has happened. Okay, this engine boot, which is SNMP engine boot, keeps track of number of boots since initialization, and the SNMP engine time keeps track of the number of seconds since the last boot. Okay, so I guess you'll be able to relate it with the initial example which I told you about client and the server and how to prevent replay attack. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to keep track of two information. One is for how many times the boot has happened till now, and the other one is how many number of seconds since the last boot the system is on. Okay, so all of these values, both of these values are placed in the outgoing messages. When these are placed in the outgoing messages, these are placed in the fields like message authenticator engine boots and message authenticator engine time. Okay, any doubt till now? Okay, so this happens in case of an authoritative engine. Now, what happens with the non-authoritative engine is since these do not have any capability to interact with the trusted users, or it doesn't say that whatever client with which the engine is communicating, or with whatever client the engine is communicating via the principal. In that case, the non-authoritative engine would completely rely on the authoritative engine. So this means that there needs to be synchronization between both of these. Okay, so the non-authoritative engine maintains the synchronization with an authoritative engine. How would it maintain it? It would also have, since both of these are engine, it would have the variables similar to the authoritative engine. But these variables would be local to non-authoritative engine only. Okay, so there would be some local copies of SNMP engine boot and SNMP engine time for every remote authoritative engine with which the non-authoritative engine communicates. Okay, now how would these values be updated? These values will be updated whenever any authentic message is received from a remote authoritative engine. Clear? So I'll repeat it once again. This needs to keep track of some local variables which are boot and the time. So boot and time, which is similar to this, there would be present a non-authoritative engine only, but these would be local to this non-authoritative engine. Now you need to have a synchronization between both of these. How would this synchronization be established? These values which are there into the boot and time variables, these would be updated whenever any authentic message is received from the remote authoritative engine. Okay, let's say at time is equals to 1, message was received at this end. So it would extract the values which is there in these variables and copy it. Okay, at time t is equals to 5, the next message is received. Then it would again update the values. What would happen between that time?
Ma'am, this non-authoritative engine has its own engine and boot variable, boot
Yes,
and time variables.
yes. It has its own, but these would be in context to the values which are there in the authoritative engine. Okay.
Are they the same?
Yes, they are the same. See,
Then why do you need to send it twice?
I'm not sending it twice. Since I said that both of these engines are there, if I'll not use this boot and this time, I need to make both of these variables up to date with the existing system. If I do not make them these up to date, these can be used to have replay attacks. Consider these as normal variables. So if any variable has any data which is invalid data, because let's say this has a value which is 4 and this has time 10 timestamp. Okay, and this time has only one timestamp. So there can be a case where a packet is originated from the intruder. Let's say the principal is the intruder. Okay, he sends in the packet at a very later stage or uses any packet which had the information of timestamp 1. In that case, when the non-authoritative engine receives that packet, he would say that, okay, the timestamp is also, in my case also it is 1 and in the received message it is also 1. So this would mean that both of the packets are valid. However, it was a previous packet which is actually invalid packet. Why? Because the current communication time between my authoritative engine and the actual principal is 10. Clear? So, since these do not have their own capability to update the values or to have relation or to have proper authentication factor, what happens is these completely rely upon authoritative engines. Okay. Now, when you are relying on the authoritative engine, this would send in the values of boot and time so that they can update it. Okay. Let's say there isn't any message received at non-authoritative engine's end from the authoritative engine. पहला मैसेज मिला था t is equals to 1 पर, उसके बाद कोई मैसेज नहीं मिला. Does this mean that there isn't any communication happening? No, obviously this doesn't mean. In this case, what might happen is any intruder can come in and request the messages uh, and find out the status at the non-authoritative engine's end. Your non-authoritative engine, NA engine, would grant the access. So this thing needs to be prevented because we already said that in USN authentication, we need to have timeliness verification. So in order to prevent such replay attacks or any message delays in such case, what other capability is added in NAE is that the boot and time values within it is updated by its own. So what will I say? Boot will be incremented by 1 or time will be incremented by 1. Okay. When does this happen? This normally happens when there is delays in the message updates, or there is only small amount of time between two consecutive messages which are arriving at the non-authoritative engine end. So what would happen between these message updates? The non-authoritative engine increments the values of the SNMP engine time for the remote authoritative engine, and just to maintain some sort of synchronization, because already we said that both of these are synchronized. Now, where can these values be used? These values are normally inserted in outgoing messages which are intended for authoritative engine. Now, whenever any authoritative engine would receive such message, it would compare the incoming values of the boot and time values with its own boot and time values. Now, if both of these values match, and if if both of these values match, then it would accept the information and say that yes, both of these are synchronized. However, if the incoming time value is having some difference, let's say the difference is around 150 seconds of the actual time value, then what we'll say? We'll say that the message is declared to be within the time window. Then also I would accept the message. However, if it is greater than 150 seconds, I would obviously say that the reception of the message is either delayed, or the message which is being sent by NAE is some message which is very older message. In that case, I would have to discard the message. Then again, authoritative engine will again send the information to the NAE to update its credentials. Okay, any doubt?
Ma'am, what if you send the message in the time window and one it just gets manipulated by the error? So the values received are both different for authoritative and non-authoritative. But
Yes.
it's in the time window. Ma'am, then what will you do?
It's in the, see, here communication is happening between AE and NAE. So we assume that AE always is behaving in a normal way. That invalidation comes from the NAE side. If it is in a NAE, if it is in a, if it is within the time window, then it will not be considered as a intruders or a replay attack. See, replay, this thing is just to handle replay attack, what case I am telling. So for every attack, there would be any other defenses into the system. Did I answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, but it's a drawback because errors can happen.
It is a drawback. Error can happen in case where the message which is received is, even if it is within a time domain, but it is a spurious message. It can happen. So just to prevent that thing, they are doing authentication, authorization. Here, the usage of timestamp is always to prevent replay attack. In whatever case you're saying, it is always done so that any invalid packet is not considered as valid packet. Time is the only important thing which is considered when you are considering validation of the packets on the basis of time of origination. Okay. Timestamps. Why is the timestamp or why is the timestamp used? Timestamp is always used just to find out whether it's an older packet or whether it's a newer packet. So if it is an older packet, obviously it would be in context to any sort of attack. If the time window is lesser, then obviously it is not a invalid packet. In 150 seconds or 150 milliseconds, if I consider it, it would not be said as it's a let's say it is a intruder's packet. So there is a time limit up to which a proper TCP connection exists. Only then, after once it is satisfied, then it would be terminated.
Ma'am, what if the intruder is very fast?
That doesn't happen. See, obviously communication is happening. You have a valid link between client and server now. It cannot be terminated within just a second. This thing, which is replay attack, normally happens when there is not any communication happening between the C and S for a larger amount of time. अब लार्जर का मतलब ये नहीं है कि 1 घंटा नहीं हुआ या 10 मिनट नहीं हुआ. That depends upon what window has been kept at the server side. Okay. So the next thing which we discussed is we have already spoken about the secret key authentication. The other thing which comes up is once we have done the authentication, we need to keep track of how the privacy needs to be preserved. So just to preserve privacy, what do we use? We use encryption. So here the DES encryption is used. So yesterday I told you about stream ciphers and how the block ciphers are generated. So in case of an SNMP v3, you have the managers and agents which are encrypting the message using DES just to prevent eavesdropping by the third parties. Also, here as well, you need to have a shared secret key between the manager entity and the agent entity. And whenever any privacy is invoked between a principal and a remote engine, all the traffic between them is encrypted using DES. Clear? So DES normally has the concept of cipher blockchaining. So in case of a cipher blockchaining mode, you would be requiring some sort of initial vector, which would be, okay, so this is a plain text. You need to generate a ciphertext for this. In case of cipher blockchaining, what normally happens is your M would be the plain text. This would be XORed with some information and then CT would be generated. Either it can be key K or it needs to be an initial vector. So that initial vector can be any binary value depending on what the client and the server have agreed upon. Okay, and then a cipher text one is generated. Okay, next is, since we were saying that it's a block cipher, so your message would have been divided into multiple blocks. So I have M1, M2. Now when you are generating the next cipher, what would be done? This would be XORed with this, which is CT1, and then the CT2 would be generated. Similarly, when you have the third section of the message, this would be XORed with CT2 and then a CT3 would be generated. This happens in a cipher block chaining mode. So your DES is completely dependent upon cipher block chaining, and due to this encryption policy adopted, the privacy is preserved in the SNMP v3. So the information which is used in the message header, that is message privacy parameters, this thing contains the value of IV. Okay, or we can say that any value which is extracted from IV will be stored in the message format and the field will be message privacy parameter. So since IV is used for encryption, it would obviously be used for decryption. It is not something which is equivalent to shared secret key. So you can directly send it to the um, to what? To the sender. So here message privacy to the receiver, sorry. So here the message privacy parameter is a field in the message header which contains a value from which the IV can be derived by both the sender and the receiver. Because IV is used in encryption, similarly it would be used in the decryption. You can use the shared secret key depending upon how the DES is being designed. Okay. The final thing which is there is VACM, that is View Based Access Control Model. This is the third function of the SNMP v3, just to provide access to the clients. So similar to what all MIB information was there in your SNMP version 1, the similar things are adopted in a view-based access control model. The document which has been sent to you has the information of VACM. You can go through it and it is already explained to you in previous classes. Okay, so with this we complete the SNMP v3 which is actually there. You do not need to go into the detail of the DES. Just find out how the authentication, privacy and access control uh, methods are implemented in SNMP v3. How are those models implemented in? Okay, so with this, we are done with SNMP v3. In the next class, we'll start with new topics. Um, you all have enrolled in one of the lab course, which is Scientific Computing 1. That I that I'll take. So you guys tell me what are your free slots or the slots which are occupied so that I can schedule it on. So you have my class on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays,
Yes, ma'am.
12 to 1. What
Yes.
else? 12
On
to
Friday, Patnaik sir has class on 12, between 12 and 1.
okay. From 10 to 11, do you have classes? From
Mon- Monday and Friday we don't have.
Monday and Friday, you don't have class from 10 to 11.
Ma'am, but this Monday paper is scheduled.
Okay, I'll change the timings in that case. Uh, can we have the lab on Tuesday 10 to 11?
No, ma'am. Patnaik sir's class is scheduled.
Wednesday?
Yes, ma'am.
Wednesday 10 to 11 is fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Wednesday So we'll have the lab on Wednesday and Thursday 10 to 11. Will it work?
Ma'am, Thursday, but time for class is scheduled 10 to 11.
Thursday also, but 9 sir's class is scheduled. Friday 10 to 11.
Yes, ma'am. No,
What? Wednesday and Friday 10 to 11. Okay. You have your minors scheduled on which day? Wednesday. Fine. So this Wednesday at 12 o'clock, 12 to 1, you'll have your minor.
okay, ma'am.
Fine. Yes. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.